The night my barn burned, I stood in my yard with my boots half in the mud and felt something inside me go quiet. Like a radio turning off mid-song, you know, that little hollow silence before you realize the world's changed. 3 sentences. My barn is gone. The neighborhood is watching, and Marjorie Hale is smiling like a woman who's already written the ending. That'll grab you, or it grabbed me. And for the next year, every quiet morning and every mailbox I passed was a reminder that small things can swell into something dangerous if the right people decide they want control. I'm Mike Carter. I grew up on land where you could hear the seasons before you understood them, and the barn I built with my dad was more than timber. It was memory and sweat, and the kind of stubbornness that comes from fixing things yourself. We moved into a place called Hollow Ridge because I wanted space, not rules. Turns out rules have a way of finding you. Hollow Ridge had neat fences, HOA-sponsored bake sales, and a president who liked being seen in a white blazer, clipboard tucked under her arm, like she'd been elected by fate itself. Marjorie Hale? She didn't like that I kept my grass a little long, that my truck was parked in a way that made her eye twitch. She liked order, and she liked being the one who decided what order meant. At first it was small, the way bullies start. A polite note slipped under the door about community standards, a passive-aggressive flyer about property values, a smile that dried faster than it arrived. I answered the letters as if they were mail from a neighbor firm, a little sarcastic because I thought sarcasm would be enough armor. It wasn't. For Marjorie, the neighborly refusal to prune my trees was an invitation to escalate. She started sending compliance officers, elderly folks with clipboards who sniffed at my shed like they were detectives at a crime scene. She'd host community inspections on weekends and hover at the edges, critiquing, making quiet notes, making the rest of Hollow Ridge look at my property as if I'd committed a social misdemeanor. There's a knot that forms in you when you're being pushed by someone who wants to break you slowly. It's not loud. It's a patient pressure like water wearing down stone. The HOA filed a faux easement claim at one point, something about right-of-way that, on paper, could have meant I had to move my fence. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. Or worse, they nodded politely while repeating Marjorie's talking points. I kept records, of course, emails, photos, dates. I wrote things down because that's what people who expect to be unfairly accused do. I also watched Marjorie. She had a way of speaking loudly enough so the crowd could hear, but soft enough so the subject felt alone. "We're just doing what's best for the community," she'd say, and the community would applaud like a choir trained to agree. Then the small humiliations turned to threats. One night, a group of men showed up at my driveway not to fight, but to intimidate. One of them banged a baseball bat against his palm and said, "Why don't you just sell the place, Mike? Make it easier on yourself." There's a human sound that's not a threat and not a joke, somewhere between a laugh and a warning, and I heard it then. I could have called the police immediately, but I didn't. I'm not proud of that hesitation. Instead, I towed a car that was parked on my property without permission, a childish, petty victory, and I felt like I'd pushed back. It only made Marjorie lean in harder. The night of the fire, I'd gone to bed early because the barn smelled faintly of oil from the tractor, and I wanted to breathe in the safe kind of worry that comes from maintenance, not malice. At 2 a.m, a neighbor's shout cut through the dark. I ran outside and saw the sky painted orange, the barn a silhouette with tongues of flame licking through the roof. Hollow Ridge pooled at the road, faces lit by fire, and there she was, Marjorie at the fringe, her profile sharp, a half-smile that made my stomach drop. People said later it was shock, that she was stunned, that she was just like any other neighbor watching a disaster. My gut said something else. Call it training. Years ago, I'd been a volunteer with a rural firefighting crew. I'm not a professional, but I know where a fire starts, how it moves. That night it didn't look random. I did something most folks don't when something like that happens. I didn't scream as the crowd screamed. I looked. I moved through the ruins the next morning like a man following a memory, taking photos, smelling, tracing burn patterns. The fire left a grammar to its destruction, and I read it because I had to. Accelerant burns where you wouldn't expect, odd residues. A path that looked deliberate. I found a discarded gas can in the ditch across from the Hale house, not proof on its own, but a breadcrumb. I started asking questions in a way I'd never asked before, and people who'd been steered by Marjorie's narrative began to drop crumbs themselves. An offhand comment about a late-night car, a security camera that captured a black SUV pulling away. Nobody wanted to be the one to speak up, but everyone wanted the truth. It turns out, the difference between nobody and someone is often nothing more than a nudge. Here's where things turned into a chess match. I could have marched to the HOA meeting with a sign and a speech, but that's a show, and shows don't always win. Instead, I assembled a quiet case. Footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera, a lab test on an accelerant sample, sworn statements from a couple of folks who had seen Marjorie's SUV that night. I fed tiny, anonymous tips to the right people: the county fire marshal, a local reporter who still believed in asking hard questions. I fixed my barn photos into a timeline, annotated everything. It wasn't glamorous. It was patient. At a packed HOA meeting, with folks who'd come just to see a bit of theater, I walked in carrying the weight of what I'd found. Marjorie was there front and center, pristine, scanning the room as if it were a stage, and she owned the script. I laid out the evidence slowly: footage, receipts, a chain of messages, and watched her face do what faces do when the script flips. It tries to find the new line. She denied it, of course, voice steady, hands folded like a woman bracing for applause. But then the county marshal walked in, quietly, and the room held its breath as a uniformed officer produced a warrant. Marjorie's expression finally cracked into the human thing underneath the performance, and for a second I felt that old anger, the kind that wants to shout and stomp and throw the chair across the room. Instead, the room hums with a different noise, the sound of justice, slow, procedural, not the satisfying slam you see in movies, but the kind that matters. There was a trial, details that would bore some and invigorate others: testimony, lab reports, a neighbor who admitted he'd lied at first because he was scared of being ostracized. Marjorie was convicted for arson and conspiracy. She lost the HOA presidency, too. The victory felt like a repaired fence, good and necessary, but it didn't bring the barn back. Insurance helped rebuild a sturdier structure, steel reinforced, practical, and neighbors who'd been silent began to visit with casseroles and awkward apologies. Some of them still avoided my eyes sometimes, and that was okay. People are complicated. Fear makes good people complicit. What I learned, not the legal parts, but the human ones, is that power gets hungry in quiet places. It likes tiny rules because they let it grow unnoticed. It likes to make examples, and it rewards conformity. The people who stood with me at the end weren't heroes with capes. They were folks who decided they didn't want to be led by fear anymore. The ones who turned away aren't villains either. They were mostly balancing mortgage payments and PDA schedules, and the kind of exhaustion that makes courage a luxury. I don't tell you this to be noble. I tell you this because if you live in a quiet neighborhood, or a small town, or anywhere people say we've always done things this way, watch who's defining we. If you're wondering what the final image is, picture a summer afternoon this year, the rebuilt barn with its fresh paint, a couple of kids playing tag without an adult hovering, neighbors barbecuing like it's ordinary. I stood there with a beer, watching, not because I'd won a war, but because the day felt like permission to breathe without watching over my shoulder. And yet, because stories need a life past the applause, here's my parting. Justice doesn't always make everything whole, and the people who wield power rarely change their taste for it overnight. The question I want you to think about is this: when someone in your neighborhood starts deciding who fits and who doesn't, what do you do? Do you stay quiet? Do you laugh along? Share the video if you think small-town power plays should be public conversation. And if you're new here, subscribe. I'll keep telling stories about people who built things and fought for them, because there's a dignity to that, even when it's messy. Debate hard. Be kind in your arguing. And if you're ever standing on your own porch looking at someone smile and knowing it means trouble, write it down. Take a picture. And don't let "just because" be the end of the sentence.